Cloud connected. Parking mode off.
That is literally gasping to breathe, are now driving up in their cars to this place of worship. The Gurdwara has about 25 oxygen cylinders that they try to replenish ever so often as they can. And I just saw the most disturbing scene of a boy who was driving his mother, and he came in tears saying, "I need oxygen." And somebody came rushing out of Gurdwara with a giant oxygen cylinder and set it up here on the road by her car window. That's the Gurdwara, the place of worship behind me, where places of worship are now turning into abodes of oxygen. That is how bad it is. Hospitals are having to shut emergency wards, no longer being able to take patients. Some patients are dying at the gates of hospitals. I met the mother of a one-day-old baby who was COVID positive, who couldn't get admitted. I met a young boy who drove with his mother for 12 hours all across the city, and I saw her gasping for oxygen at the back of the ambulance. The ambulance only had one cylinder, and that too was running short. It's horrific what's happening. I mean, in 25 years of being a journalist, I've never run short of words, but this might be finally that moment. I never thought the day would come when I would see an oxygen drive-through at a place of worship. And frankly, turn by turn, every state is going through a cataclysmic peak, and then hopefully a plateau, but it almost has to go through the eye of the storm before it can emerge onto the other side. And let me tell you what we're also finding from our reporting at cremation grounds and graveyards is that what the official data is telling you, and the official data is pretty darn bad, but what the official data is telling you is not matching with what we're seeing on the ground. So to give you an example, in Surat, which is a textile town in the state of Gujarat, at one single cremation ground, undertakers told me that they had cremated 100 bodies that day. One site, one town, but the entire state of Gujarat on that day reported just 78 deaths. Similarly, in Delhi, in the last 24 hours, undertakers told me at one cremation ground that 130 bodies had been cremated. Those numbers were not reflected in the official data. So we are now worried that the data doesn't tell us the full story. There are many experts I've been speaking to who feel it's underreported. And let me quote to you what a doctor said to me. He said to me, when somebody dies because you can't give them oxygen, that's not a natural death. This doctor said that would be murder.
Barka Dutt, Washington Post columnist in Delhi, thanks to her. Well, let us now turn to Davina Gupta, the BBC senior journalist, also in Delhi. And I asked Davina about those reports which say that the COVID numbers in in India are underreported.
Right now, I'm in India's capital, Delhi, and it's on the 8th day of the lockdown. And I've spoken to at least 4 people since morning today who've told me that they are feeling COVID symptoms, but when they want to go out and get tested, path labs are turning them away. And that's the reason where it starts, that if you can't identify people who are COVID positive, how will you control the cycle? How would you take the next steps? And when I spoke to the owner of one of the private path labs in Delhi, he told me that they simply do not have enough workforce to deal with the kind of load that they're seeing of patients coming in, and that's why the results are also being delayed for patients who have tested with them, and they put a lot of people on wait lists. And that wait list is running for 2 to 3 days for some people. So when you don't have enough testing done on the ground, you would actually not know the real situation. It is a grim situation. It's a dangerous situation because the health workers are not able to grapple with the enormity of the situation if they don't know the real numbers. So it could be worse than what we're looking at, which is the fifth straight day of a record high, over 350,000 infected cases that are reported, over 2,800 lives that are being lost that are reported.
So, I have another question, Davina, as we look at the numbers. And this was one that I saw online. This is an Irish author, Ailish O'Hanlon, who also writes for the Sunday Independent in Ireland. And she said, a genuine question, the scenes in India are tragic, but she says, I don't understand the figures. India is so big, like with 1 billion people, how can 3,000 deaths a day from COVID overwhelm the health service? I know what she's saying, that the figure is like, why are we seeing those scenes if in fact those numbers that we've seen in much smaller countries in some days?
I would ask her to visit to India whenever it's possible and just see the current state of public health infrastructure here. Because of course it's a country of 1 billion plus people, but the kind of public healthcare system that we have in India is not enough. We have one doctor for thousands of people, and that's the state of affairs when we don't have a disease in the country, when we're not looking at an infection of this scale. So you can just imagine why there are city hospitals that are running out of beds. So at least private hospitals have capacity of 500 to 600 COVID patients, but we're talking about a city of 90 million people which are battling this infection, and around 28,000 people who've been infected almost daily. So looking at the scale of this scenario, I would say that if somebody is saying that are we really shocked by these numbers, yes, we are, because the efficiency with which the Western countries can handle these numbers in their hospitals is not the same in India.
I understand. Well, let me turn as well to, you were with us on Friday, and thank you for that. You were talking to us about the oxygen supply, and I did think about people after the program, because you said they had 2 to 6 hours to try and save some of those patients if oxygen supplies arrived. What happened over the weekend?
We've just seen the situation turn for worse, because we still have hospitals that are sending urgent SOS messages. That some have taken to social media saying they just have 2 hours or 3 hours of oxygen left for their patients. Today, when I was in a hospital in Delhi's model town area, where it's been the hospital has just refused admissions to patients. They put a poster on their door saying we can't admit any more patients. We just have few hours of oxygen supply left, and that's disheartening. I'm speaking to people there. They were grappling to find beds in different city hospitals. Some of them had oxygen cylinder in their car, and I asked them how did they get that. They said they purchased it from black market, and they paid 10 times the amount which they would get at a regular price. And that's only a 45-minute supply. One cylinder is 45 minutes of supply for them, and they were sitting with that in their car, a mask on the nose of their loved one who is suffering, and it's heartbreaking.
Well, the Prime Minister Narendra Modi has come under a lot of criticism for the state of the pandemic within India now. You don't have to go too far to see that, but we saw a lot from Twitter that it has been removing tweets about COVID-19 at the request of the government. What do you know about that?
Well, it's been reported by Reuters that the Indian government had asked critical tweets to be removed from social media site Twitter. The BJP, which is the ruling Hindu Nationalist Party, the spokesperson of that party told the BBC that it's only done in cases where there's fake news, and they want to curb it at the moment. But going through the accounts that have been removed, these are also opposition leaders. There's a renowned lawyer whose tweet has been removed, which has basically criticized the government for its handling and mishandling rather of this crisis and not preparing enough. They've also questioned why political rallies have been held when they knew that this infection, we're not yet out of it, and was there an early triumph that political leaders celebrated? This was the content of tweet that's been removed, and that's what's questioned by people who voted them in power, because we're talking about a party that came with majority mandate. And what's surprising is that even after this criticism and even after this episode, we do see elections being held today. There was an election held in the eastern part of India, in the state of West Bengal. Local election was held in India's most populous state, Uttar Pradesh. Both of them are again battling with similar issues. The fact is, who's taking these decisions? The strongman approach with which the leader, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, came to power is now being doubted by his own followers, many of them are saying, why not announce right now a national lockdown and curb and restrict movement wherever possible? Is politics more important than people's lives?
That's Davina Gupta. Thanks again to her. If you want to follow Davina, she's at Davina Gupta News on Twitter. Also, she just told me as she was going out the door, so to speak, that Bangalore, which is really the tech centre, they are going to institute a lockdown. So let's see if others also follow suit. But let me stay with this story. And, you know, of course, so sad for so many people that have been through loss and grief over these past weeks. I want to bring Vinar Verma onto the programme, who's on the line with his family in Ahmedabad in the state of Gujarat. Vinar, I understand that you lost a colleague today to COVID. So first off, we are so sad and really send you our condolences with that. Perhaps you'd like to tell us a little bit about your colleague?
Yeah, I'm based out of presently in Ahmedabad, which is the commercial capital of Western state of Gujarat, second largest city in India. I work in Mumbai, and I'll tell you, in Feb, we were all dancing around that COVID is gone. We are an indisciplined society. We are a society with double standards, where, like, we were doing rallies, we were dancing around, we had matches, 60,000, 80,000 people in the stadium. But common people are facing a very grim situation in the state where I am in Gujarat, as such, if I tell. This gentleman who passed away today was a junior colleague of mine. He used to report to me when I used to work with one of the leading telecom companies. He's been struggling since five days. First, we struggled to find a bed for him, a hospital bed. Comes at a premium here, like, demand far strips out the supply. This city, I would say Gujarat doesn't have that kind of bad health infra, but it's now stretching at seams. In an ideal, normal situation, government ambulance will come in 15 to 20 minutes. Today, there is no guarantee that if an ambulance will come to your home in 12 hours, 14 hours. Alas, yesterday I was renting a bed for someone known. It took me 9 years. I worked with a health tech company. I have connects across hospitals. Then also for 9 hours begging, I was able to manage a bed for a 65 years old lady. One indicator which is really sad, and people are not talking much about it, death figures are being fudged. If you go to crematorium in any part of Gujarat, whether it's Surat, city of Vadodara or Ahmedabad, 6 to 8 hours of waiting time for a body to be cremated, which is unprecedented, unseen, very, very grim and sad situation. And what hurts more is people who should have held our fingers, people who should have. It started a month back when the numbers started shooting up in Mumbai. We never woke up. Our election rallies continued, our matches continued, our people were hell bothered about the common citizen. Even if we had woken up 35, 40 days back, the situation could have been better. I think it's only last week when major politicians cancelled their political rally. As one of the panelists just said, election was on today. There was voting in UP, there was voting in Bengal. I think human life is the most important thing, and what we're seeing in last 1 week in India, we don't really value. From the city where I'm speaking in today, I think already we have a cricket series by the name Indian Premier League going on, and its version today. There's a match happening in Ahmedabad. I think one of Indian players he backed off today, maybe because of personal reasons. But again, that shows the kind of contrasting society we are in, kind of double standards we have in our society. And I pray that sanity prevails. It's common citizens who are helping each other. Their common social media is the biggest savior at the time. And I think we need a reform. We need a big reform. We need a big awakening. We need a mirror in front of us. Because I've been in this city for the last 20 years. It's faced an earthquake, it's faced floods, it's faced riots. But never ever I saw that this is a situation now. Be afraid to even go out. I've confined myself in. I have two daughters, both footballers. They haven't played for the last 3 months. And now the only way to save yourself is you save yourself. I don't know if tomorrow something happens to you, even though you may be very well connected, you may be hunting for a bed. And I don't have any shame in sharing it out here. I can't take the names. There's a big corporate group in this town which is into business of tea. 1,000 crore groups you can convert into. If I talk of billions here, 100 billion group. The chairman of the group owns a chartered plane. I am in connect with him, and today a person who owns a chartered jet calls me for an oxygen cylinder. See the helplessness we are in. That fellow who can afford anything in life was seen hunting during day for an oxygen cylinder. I think the panelists mentioned about it. So the help has started pouring in. That's the only hope we have.
That's the only hope of the help coming, but it might take. I mean, Veena, I have to say, I'm blown away listening to you. I think you have painted such an evocative picture of waiting for people to wake up, about holding a mirror in front of Indian society. Some of the figures you put out there, waiting 12 hours for an ambulance, 9 hours you were trying to find a bed for a person, and well done you for being able to do that. You believe the death figures are fudged. I'm hearing that from other reports. I don't have a response from the government on that particular point, but 6 to 8 hours of waiting time for a funeral pyre, for example, to have that space. And UP, I mentioned, is Uttar Pradesh, where the elections were taking place.
And the sad
I want
part
to thank
is
you.
we're not.
Yes.
Sad part is we're not ready to face the truth. We lie to ourselves, and I think things won't change till the time we face that. This is the truth. Let's wake up and let's face it. Let's fight it together. I think the first thing is we, as a society, politicians are also part of the society, and their followers, me, other people, journalists, everyone. I think as a society we need to really, we need a kind of renaissance at this moment. Maybe it's a godsend kind of opportunity for us to wake up.
Veena Verma, thank you so much. Come on again in the coming days, and I hope that the days get easier, but just your stories of even people who are incredibly wealthy looking for cylinders of oxygen, it begins to bring it home exactly what is happening on the ground in India. Thanks to Veena. This is OS on the BBC with Nuala McGovern. Let me bring you 3 other stories from our news site right now. Peru's former president has tested positive for COVID-19 6 months after saying he had been vaccinated. Martin Vizcarra confirmed the news just days after he was banned from public office for allegedly queue jumping to get the vaccine. Only 2.5% of people in Peru have received at least 1 dose of the COVID vaccine. The country is going through a second wave. A US teenager who sent a rant about cheerleading and her school over Snapchat is having her case heard in the Supreme Court this week. Brandy Levi was banned from her cheerleading squad for a year after her school discovered the post, which she sent in 2017. The case will determine whether schools have a right to punish students for comments they make off campus. Big ramifications there. Rolling Stones guitarist Ronnie Wood, he says he's been given the all clear after being diagnosed with cancer. The 73-year-old had small cell cancer, which usually affects the lungs. It's his second cancer diagnosis. He recovered from lung cancer back in 2017. Okay, let us hop back to coronavirus. I want to bring in one of our regular health experts, Professor Manfred Green. Good to have you back with us. Medical doctor, Professor of Epidemiology at the School of Public Health at the University of Haifa in Israel. Also should say on the National Committee for Immunization and the National Committee for Control of Epidemics. But we can have a few minutes with the professor. Great to have you back.
Great.
We're just looking. Nice to have you with us as well. Excuse me for jumping in, but just because we're short of time. Dr. Anthony Fauci, which is, I suppose, the top advisor, shall we say, to the US president, he was talking about whether guidelines should be revised by the Centre for Disease Control when we're talking about outdoor settings. Israel is a little bit ahead of everybody else when it comes to this pandemic in a good way, coming out perhaps. What do you think about that, whether it's masks or socializing outside?
Yeah, I think without being cynical, I'm saying this seriously, but I think at the end of the day, excuse me, when we reflect on the pandemic, we'll probably have an item that's called the strange story of the masks and social distancing, because it was a kind of an up and down story. At the beginning, a lot of skepticism, masks don't work. Social distancing is not going to help too much. Then they said, well, social distancing is good, but better to wash your hands. And then gradually then started to talk about masks again, and then when you should wear them and what kind of masks. So it's really been a sort of a bumpy ride. I think that what we now know from a lot of experience is that the way this virus is transmitted could be both droplet and airborne. But in general, most diseases, if you think about it, I mean, it's almost common sense. Outdoors don't spread easily because you really are, the viruses, the virus particles, the droplets are dispersed very quickly. So basically, I think the argument is that if you're in an open space and you're not very close to other people, there's no real need for a mask. But I think that the social distancing would still be important. In other words, we shouldn't have too much crowding. That would be the base. I think that's what Dr. Fauci is talking about.
Even if, say, people were both vaccinated, then what?
Well, this, goes, if any of you really want to suffer and go into the probability estimates, then just think of the situation that if one is vaccinated and has a 90% efficacy of the vaccine and another one is vaccinated also with 90%, you combine the two, you get a very low probability that one of them is actually going to be infected. And you'd have to add into that the factor that one of them is actually carrying the virus. So obviously you get very low probabilities in that situation, but it's not zero. So and when you have a lot of people gathered together, then obviously you can have individual cases. So that would be kind of almost like the law of large numbers. If you have enough people gathered together, and even if they're vaccinated, you may still get transmission.
Some breakthrough. Just very briefly, Professor, so what's the situation in Israel now? Are people wearing masks outdoors, or that's been dropped?
I think I mentioned it even previously. I think there was a problem with the message. Now the instruction is that there's no need to wear a mask outdoors when you're not in a crowded situation. But I think the message should have been reversed. I think the message should have been you must wear a mask indoors, but it's not compulsory to wear it outdoors. In other words, people should hear the first message that you must wear it indoors. So I think that's become a problem. And many people that I spoke to only heard the first part. You don't have to wear masks outdoors.
I'm like that.
Right.
I'm like that with directions. I hear the first bit and I don't hear the second. But Professor Bamford Green, you've laid it out here. So do wear a mask indoors is what he is telling us. Thanks very much.
This is the BBC World Service on the trail with the biodetection dog.
Hello! Dogs have extraordinary noses.
I very much think that as we see the world, the dogs smell it.
They're known for sniffing out drugs, but now their unique sense is tackling other problems.
It was about a 17-kilometer track up to this one house and knocked on the door, and there was this fellow who had a whole lot of bushmeat and he was arrested.
From tracking poachers in Tanzania to sniffing out cancer and COVID.
They could sniff people perhaps waiting in a queue in an airport so that they would be rapidly scanned, and then people that the dog showed interest in would then be asked to take a rapid test on site.
I'm Claire Bates. Join me to find out how canines are helping us fix the world.
The detection dogs finding COVID and poachers. Tuesday at 14 and 21 GMT.
Hello and welcome to OS with Nuala McGovern on the BBC. We're going to bring you a conversation we had with three people speaking to us from Australia, the United States and South Korea, and they're all suffering from a debilitating invisible condition, severe health anxiety, and as you can imagine, they're suffering even more during this health crisis of the coronavirus pandemic. So you're going to hear their stories, and also from a psychologist on what might help them or others you know that suffer from it.
BBC News with Julie Candler. The European Commission has begun legal action against the pharmaceutical firm AstraZeneca, alleging that it breached contractual agreements for the supply of its coronavirus vaccine. AstraZeneca said it would defend itself in court. Anti-government militia in Somalia are occupying key parts of the capital, Mogadishu. It follows Sunday's eruption of fighting with soldiers supporting President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo. Moscow's prosecutor has ordered that the political offices of Alexei Navalny suspend their activities across Russia. He's also applied to a court to suspend the work of his anti-corruption foundation. Germany said the moves were incompatible with the rule of law. An Iranian court has sentenced the British Iranian charity worker Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe to a year in jail and a year-long travel ban on charges of propaganda against the state. Her lawyer is planning to appeal. The Iranian Foreign Ministry has attempted to downplay a leaked audio tape of the Foreign Minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, in which he suggested that the Revolutionary Guards exerted too much influence over foreign policy. Doctors in India have given harrowing accounts of the situation there as the country battles a catastrophic wave of coronavirus infections. Medics in the capital say people are dying on pavements outside hospitals. Officials in Afghanistan's eastern Kunar province say a rocket attack on the governor's compound has injured at least 16 people. Many of them are children attending a competition to recite the Quran. Military sources in Nigeria say more than 30 soldiers have been killed in an Islamist attack on their convoy in the state of Borno. And Lebanon says it hopes Saudi Arabia will reconsider banning recently imposed on Lebanese fruit and vegetable imports. BBC News.
Nicola McGovern on OS from the BBC. Thanks for tuning in, or turning on, depending on how you listen. Wondering, did you watch the Oscar ceremony? Have you seen any or many of those nominated, or perhaps those that won? We want to focus in on the film that was the big winner, Nomadland, telling the story of people across America who are, as the protagonist says, houseless but not homeless. So we're actually going to hear from people who are living a nomadic lifestyle in the States. Really looking forward to speaking to them. That's coming up a little later this half hour. But before that, you may know that each day on OS around this time, we speak to people who've been impacted by the coronavirus pandemic in different ways, and people in different countries have been going through something similar. So today we want to talk about health anxiety. So this is a feeling of constant worry about your health or that you may be ill. And we wanted to hear from people who have that condition to understand how coronavirus and the pandemic has changed their day-to-day lives and also how they cope being anxious about their health. So then James has been speaking to three people. Tammy is in South Dakota in the US. Ron J is from Kenya, but living in South Korea. And first you'll hear from Bree. She's in Perth in Western Australia.
My brain thinks that it's dying at all times. If there is a new sensation in my body, if I get a headache, if I get a cold, my brain thinks that it's cancer, stroke. The really big fear for me is specifically what I got deep vein thrombosis a couple of years ago after a flight, and it took about a week for me to realise how sick I was. And when I did, I spent 2 days in intensive care, and I spent 2 weeks in hospital. It took me 6 months to recover physically, and it took me so much longer for my brain. Something basically snapped, and I spent just months in utter terror.
Tell me, how did it start for you?
For me, it started back in 2012. I was really worked up over something throughout the evening, and that night, middle of the night, I woke up and my heart was pounding and racing. I had creepy crawlies all over me. I was flushed. I was hyperventilating. I felt like I was having a heart attack. I sat with it for hours until it was morning enough for somebody to come and take me to the emergency room, and everybody just said, "Oh, you're fine, you're fine." And I'm like, I don't feel fine. And I was in the emergency room probably 3 or 4 times over the next few weeks, because it would come back and I'd feel like I was having a heart attack. All everybody ever said was, "Oh, she has anxiety." And now, for the last 13 years, like Bree said, every sensation that I have that I can't identify and link to something is a blood clot or a stroke or a heart attack or cancer or something that's wrong with me. My body's telling me I'm dying.
Ron J, what's your experience? How did it begin for you?
So mine started when I was starting to be really sexually active. I got really nervous because during sex education, they show us this film about STIs and they were quite gory. So I got really scared and self-aware, and I started googling like symptoms, and as it happens, I get some information that were quite extreme, and this kept going on and on. And when I was going 20s, I remember I was very scared. Like, my case mostly was about, it started with the fear of being HIV positive for some reason, because I was sexually active and I wasn't married, which was something I wasn't supposed to be doing. I was raised up in a very strict Christian environment, and anything to do with premarital sex was forbidden. So this guilt and what I'd learned in sex education, I kept thinking that, oh, maybe I'm gonna catch something. And this progressed to when I had a headache, or I got even a physical injury, like a sprain in my arm or something. I would always think that it's gonna become serious and I'm gonna have my arm amputated.
Just on that point of searching on the internet, looking for stuff that you think you might be going through and not finding reassurance, maybe being even more frightened, is that something, Bree, you can relate to?
Absolutely. The lure of Dr. Google is really strong, to just have just a really quick look just to see, what kind of headache this is, and ultimately it's always a stroke. Basically, the most viewed website I think that I have is my Department of Health's emergency wait times. So if I was having a day where I just wasn't feeling good and I was starting to panic, I would see how long the wait time in emergency was, and was trying to judge whether or not what I was feeling was serious enough to justify a long wait time.
Yeah, towards the beginning, definitely WebMD was my best friend and my number one nemesis. When you have
that's a medical website in the US, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I actually had a doctor at one point tell me that I should not ever go on the website, and I should always just call and ask if there's something wrong with me, rather than look it up myself, because I will end up having everything under the sun. So I try as hard as I can not to do that. If I'm really, really struggling, I have someone else look it up for me. My husband has learned that having someone there, so if something goes wrong, they can help me, or having someone who can bolster these thoughts that I have myself about it's all right, it's safe, nothing's wrong with me. Sometimes I don't trust myself to say those things anymore, and I need someone else to say them for me. Sometimes I just ask him to check on me in the middle of the night if he wakes up, and make sure I'm still alive.
Gosh, we obviously have been speaking so much about the pandemic in the last year or so. When COVID-19 became a thing, you were already, Bree, experiencing health anxiety. What did that do to you?
I cried every day for weeks. I was utterly terrified. In those early days where we weren't really sure how things were transmitted, what sort of the symptoms were, your base symptoms of basically just being a cold are just so common that it was just so possible that you could have it and maybe not really know, and the long development time, all of that was utterly terrifying to me. In my job, I was an essential worker, so I was still required to come into the CBD when everyone else got to stay home. That was a really scary time. And as the pandemic went on, and there are new articles every day about, the long-term sort of impact that it's having on people's bodies, I was reading that the highest cause of death in young people that were dying were from blood clots. And so the things that set me up are talking about clots, difficulty breathing, fevers, all these sorts of things, a racing heartbeat. All of those things are your core COVID sort of symptoms, and those are the things that scare me the most.
What about you, Tammy?
Absolutely terrifying, for sure. Most of my days before that are spent trying to rationalize to myself that I'm safe, and all of a sudden everywhere in the world was unsafe for people. It was like the world had decided to take the one thing I'm the most afraid of and put it everywhere. It was constant panic. I'm lucky enough that I was able to shift to working from home remotely. But even there, I had 4 people in my family, and I had to take care of my grandmother with dementia sometimes, and just me getting sick, them getting sick. I mean, anxiety gives you so many symptoms that match with COVID. I always thought I had it all the time as well. I even mentioned my symptoms to a tester at one point just so that I could go in and get tested, because I just needed that confirmation that I didn't have it.
I remember, so I was in Kenya at the moment when they started announcing like the symptoms, and I remember getting really scared, and when we would go out, so the country was in lockdown for the first time ever, and we went shopping just to stock up, and I remember when we came back, I was really scared that I took off all my clothes right at the door. I left them outside for weeks, and even when I got back into the house, I took a shower, but I started feeling like, like I couldn't breathe, like getting the symptoms basically, and this kept on going for a few days.
Ranjay there, he's from Kenya, living in South Korea. We also heard from Tammy in South Dakota in the States, and Bree in Perth in Western Australia. Now listening to our guest, and we're speaking to Ben James, I should mention, was Dr. Tara Quinn Chirillo, a psychologist, has a practice in the southeast of England, and a former guest. Great to have you back with us, Tara.
Hi, Nina, nice to talk to you again.
Okay, so a couple of things. First, I really feel for those people. They seem paralysed, I suppose, in their anxiety. And a little of what I was reading is that reassurance often does not reassure. So what can they do? Or if a listener feels that they have a similar experience of what our guests were going through.
I think the thing that really struck me there is how often some people are invalidated in terms of what they're going through. So just listen to Bree's journey, to Tammy there and Ranjay, in terms of how many times they've explained symptoms and they've been met with, it's just anxiety or it's just this, and you don't need to worry, and perhaps people minimising just the impact on them. But when we look from a psychological point of view, there is a big difference between health anxiety as a clinical disorder versus anxiety about COVID. So it's quite useful to separate those two things. But I think it's important to validate and to say to people, gosh, that's really difficult, that to them, their bodies are feeling that way, their minds are racing with all of these thoughts, and to try and help them feel contained by saying, we're listening to you, we're hearing what you're going through.
And it did sound like, particularly with Bree, that she was her partner, her husband, that she did have a support there who was listening, but perhaps that bigger society or the next level out are not. I mean, are there particular, what would I call them, ways that could kind of help bring or stop a panic attack in its tracks? Because that's what I think I'm hearing from most of them about when they get very anxious about their health, and particularly now in this pandemic.
Yes, it's recognised. Sometimes it's very difficult. It's supporting people to kind of accept the psychological model of how anxiety can be very cyclical in terms of panic, in terms of health anxiety. So helping people to recognise when their body, when their mind is becoming aroused, so when thoughts are racing, when you're noticing body symptoms that are becoming quite extreme, so your heart beating very fast, for example, having sweaty hands, feeling, just as Tammy was saying, I literally feel like I'm having a heart attack. And then perhaps understanding the role that our brain has. So what our brain will do sometimes is misinterpret those body symptoms as being something much worse than they actually are, and that's when you need to be careful that you don't invalidate, but at the same time that you help to educate people that sometimes our brain will go into threat mode. This is not good, I need to do something about it, and that's when people will then reach for the check-in, getting reassurance, perhaps avoiding going out or doing perhaps extreme behaviours in order to try and get rid of these really difficult symptoms.
Yeah, the feelings. So with that, is it CBT, like cognitive behavioural therapy, that can help, or do medication sometimes help as well?
Yes, usually a combination of both. So there's a high evidence-based combination of medication and therapies such as cognitive behavioural therapy, or there's ACT. There are different types of therapies. They're all slightly different to each other, but the idea is that you help educate the patient to understand the model, to look at the circle of symptoms, as we call it, what the triggers are. Those triggers can be internal. Our body might have symptoms and then we might misinterpret those, but also there can be external triggers. So when we look at COVID, we're seeing in the media people very poorly. We're seeing people talk about risk and things you need to do to avert that risk. So actually identifying what your triggers are and then helping you to understand how your brain responds and how your body responds, and then how we can help to slow that down and to calm it down. So those therapies will all help you look at strategies like making room for difficult thoughts, which is really hard, trying to help you get grounded, so doing really simple breathing exercises, mindfulness strategies that just help you get in the here and now so that you can go, gosh, look what's happening to me.
And stop the catastrophizing, which I think I was hearing a little from our guests there. My goodness, I wish them all the best, and I really hope it subsides as perhaps the world hopefully kind of comes out the other side of this pandemic, and that they can get some relief, which it just sounded so intense, I think, listening to that conversation. But Dr. Tara Quinn Chirillo, you can find her on Twitter. I follow her, you should too. Thanks so much. I know you're going to have a session about coming out of the pandemic, which we'll have to talk about another time, because it's a whole different ball game, right? Life after the pandemic. But thanks so much for speaking to us. Neil McGovern with you on OS from the BBC Oral Service. Let me bring you a few more stories. These ones from our BBC Africa Live page. Catholic Church authorities say an Italian priest has been shot and injured in South Sudan by unknown gunmen. Father Christian Calasare was attacked at his house on Sunday night. He is receiving treatment in hospital. The motive for the attack remains unclear. Let's stay in South Sudan. The country's health ministry has rejected advice from the World Health Organization not to destroy expired Oxford AstraZeneca COVID vaccines. The government has said it will not use the 60,000 vaccines and will destroy them. The WHO has asked governments to wait for its guidance, saying vaccines can be used for up to 36 months after manufacture. Malawi has also said it will go ahead and destroy 16,000 doses of expired AstraZeneca vaccine. It's an interesting story. Perhaps we'll go deeper on that one in one of our editions. Also, South Africa says it will resume its Johnson & Johnson vaccine rollout on Wednesday. The country suspended 2 weeks ago. That was over concerns that the jab could cause rare blood clots, but its health minister says there's a 1 in a million chance of getting a clot after the vaccine. You listen to OS from the BBC World Service. Right, let us talk about the Oscars, really about one film in particular. The big winner was Nomadland. 3 Oscars: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress, and it is a slow-burning drama, is the way it's been described, about a woman who lives in her van in the American West after the financial crash. And a lot of the cast is made up of real people, so people who live a nomadic lifestyle, who are playing fictionalized versions of themselves. And a nomad is someone who moves from place to place with no permanent home. And I want to speak to 2 people who have chosen this lifestyle as well. Really interested, I have to say, to hear from them. We have Rhonda, who's in Albania at the moment. I understand. Rhonda, great to have you on. Where are you from originally?
I'm from Florida.
Okay, you've travelled quite a few miles. Rhonda, I want to introduce you to Amanda, who I believe is in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Amanda.
Hi.
Hi, Amanda. Lovely. You two have quite a bit in common, probably, even though you've just met, or maybe you've met. Who knows? When this Nomadland, when I'm looking at it, it looks like people sometimes meet up, years down the line again as they travel around. Tell me a little bit, Rhonda. First off, where are you? Describe a little bit as we set the scene, where you're speaking to us from.
Okay, well, currently I'm a nomad living out of a backpack, and I'm on the Albanian Riviera. I'm looking across crazy, beautiful blue water at a Greek island and kind of pinching myself that this lifestyle has led me to such incredible opportunities. So that's where I am at the moment. I've been a nomad now for almost 8 years.
Okay, Amanda, set the scene for us. Where are you?
I'm currently in Phoenix, Arizona, sitting at a coffee shop. I always dreamed of working from coffee
shops when I had my real 9-to-5 job. So I'm finally living that lifestyle.
Okay, well, I'm going to turn the floor over to both of you. Rhonda, perhaps you could start by telling us how you chose this lifestyle, or whether it chose you, and then we'll get Amanda to pick up. Go ahead.
Well, thanks. And I'm excited to hear about Amanda, because I've hung out at coffee shops and meetings myself before. I think I kind of came to a point of feeling like I was doing a lot of spinning my wheels without feeling like I was able to get ahead. And I've always dreamt of living like a butterfly. And one day it just hit me that maybe I wasn't going to be able to figure it out, just to go for it and to do it. Because I'm not a wealthy person, and time and money are usually the obstacles between living and drifting and seeing the world, you know. So I started writing about it. If anybody wants to follow along, I'm Rhonda Recreates on Instagram, because I knew at that time recreating my life in this unusual way was quite unusual. But since then, I've met many, many nomads around the globe. Digital nomadry's become a thing, you know, and it's exciting to me, because there's a sad part about people being forced out of their homes, but then there's a whole other side of how amazing it can be to live differently. We don't necessarily have to confine ourselves to some of the costs of conventional American living, you know.
Go ahead, Amanda, with your story.
I wanted to just say I love the idea of recreating your life, because that's exactly what I'm doing. I started in a normal 9-to-5 corporate career, and I was just so dissatisfied with it. I was miserable and angry all the time, even though I had all the money I needed to survive. I had a normal apartment, nice equipment, living, and all that stuff. And so I'm doing something very similar, where I'm deconstructing that identity. Living on the road has created this quite philosophical environment to really go deep and do some introspection to figure out who I am.
Love it.
And what do you think, Amanda? So you started, I think, really in November, would that be correct, 2020? I believe Rhonda's on the road 8 years now. Amanda, maybe you have a question for Rhonda.
Yeah, I would love to know, in your span of 8 years, what's the biggest lesson you've learned, or the biggest takeaway that you've come across?
I think the biggest takeaway is one that I already did before I got into it. It's just, I feel like I've affirmed it and wanted to share it as I've gone along, and that's, I trust humanity. You can't trust humanity completely. It can disappoint you. But by far, the majority of people out there are wanting to be friends, wanting to be helpful, and everybody's kind of watching out for themselves. But I just found, so we're in our 39th country now, and did many laps around America, living, you know, very basic, or much like in the movie. It's like, you know, just boondocking, basically. And I think figuring out ways to make some trickle income. So my question for you, Amanda, is what is your method of making money now when you're sitting in a coffee shop? What are you doing?
Yeah, I have a couple income streams. One, I blog over at Millionaire by next year, but my primary income stream is I go to thrift stores, I think they're called charity shops in the UK, and I buy used books and I sell them on eBay and Amazon. So I actually have stuff I sell that I live in my car with, so it's a very tight space.
I relate to that. I do exotic shopping for people as I travel along. I have different people that collect things, and they let me know what to look for them, and I make a little bit this way. I do different kinds of things to keep a little bit of an income stream.
That's awesome.
I love that we're hearing a little bit of the sounds as well of whether it's the Albanian Riviera or Phoenix, Arizona. I'm not sure, but I feel like I'm on the road with you ladies. What about you, Amanda? I mean, is there something that has surprised you so far as you're probably, I suppose, what are we, about 6 months into this journey?
Yeah, the biggest surprise for me is I've let my guard down quite a bit. I used to be very, let's say, conservative in my approach to friendships and relationships to people. And this kind of goes to Rhonda's point, where you find this community, and Nomadland, I think
really touched on this too. There's a community of like-minded people that you really cleave onto, and you kind of reduce all those barriers, the social and the cultural barriers that kind of make us all very individualistic, and you start to realize you're part of a bigger whole.
Are you with somebody, Amanda, or are you by yourself as you travel around?
I'm by myself, but as I go through this, I've stumbled across a number of different people on my journey who I would have never met otherwise.
Yeah. And Rhonda, you?
I missed the beginning of your question. I was in also said, what is that thing I was going to go?
No worries. I was just saying, are you traveling by yourself or are you with somebody?
I'm traveling with somebody, and so many of the points that she made when I was stateside, when I went globally, it expanded even to this international kind of a community of idealists that are doing all sorts of dream projects, and the ability to plug into a whole different world of communities of like-minded people by kind of letting go of the safe, conventional lifestyle. It's been a fascinating ride.
You know, I've just got a couple of minutes, a little under, but I just wonder, Rhonda, can you ever see yourself in a settled lifestyle again?
Settled gets harder and harder for me to define, to imagine. Right. A couple of years ago, I was doing some volunteering in Bulgaria and found out how affordable properties were there, and bought a piece of property like a base camp, and I can imagine veggie gardening there and having volunteers from around the world come and help me do that. I can imagine being still in a rural, simple setting now more than I could before. But it's going to be really hard.
And Amanda? Sorry, Rhonda. What about you, Amanda? Do you have plans for a settled life in the future, or?
There are no plans for settling in the future. There's a whole world out there that I really want to explore. So I'm eager to kind of do what Rhonda's doing and pack a backpack and go adventure out and see what's there.
I've got lots of resources for you, man. Just message me.
We'll have to put both of these women in touch with each other. Thank you both so much for giving us. I'm living vicariously through you as I broadcast from home. It's been really great to speak to you. Amanda speaking to us from Phoenix, Arizona, and Rhonda from the Albanian Riviera. And it was the film Nomadland that won big at the Oscars last night that prompted us to have that conversation. Pop-provoking, right? Could you do it? Stay with us on OS from the BBC World Service.
This is the BBC World Service, where Harriet Gilbert brings us the next World Book Club.
Miss Jane Neal met her maker in the early morning mist of Thanksgiving Sunday.
It's the detective mystery Still Life by Louise Penny. I sat down, I created a village I would choose to live in, and characters I would want to hang around with, because I knew it would take me a few years to write the book, which it did.
World Book Club, Saturday at 11 GMT. And in an hour, Outlook with Emily Webb.
The fisherman and the so-called spy whale. When Yuval Heston stumbled across a beluga whale wearing a harness out at sea, he hoped to remove it. But when he took a closer look at the harness, the buckle read Equipment of St. Petersburg. The mystery unfolds on Outlook.
Now we return to OS, here on the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Service. We've all been hearing the sad and at times desperate stories coming out of India due to coronavirus, and we really hoped that conditions might improve over the weekend. But instead, doctors in the capital are describing people dying on the streets as infections and deaths reach record numbers again for the fifth day. Some have used social media to try and find an available hospital bed or oxygen, both in such short supply for their sick loved ones, and others, they've turned to the black market to buy medicine, pure oxygen, but they are now at hugely inflated prices. You're going to hear from people who are living through it. Also, some Indians we've spoken to are happy that countries are deciding to send aid. We've also seen that the Indian board heads of Google and Microsoft, they both plan to support the country of their birth
the company had not come up with a reliable strategy to ensure the timely delivery of doses. Our health correspondent Naomi Grimley has more details.
The EU said it was suing AstraZeneca to ensure the speedy delivery of doses which European citizens are entitled to. In the first quarter of this year, AstraZeneca delivered just 31 million doses out of an expected 120 million. In a statement, it said vaccines were difficult to manufacture and technical challenges had arisen, but that output was now improving and 50 million doses will have been delivered by the end of April.
Forces loyal to the opposition in Somalia are occupying key parts of the capital Mogadishu following Sunday's eruption of fighting with soldiers supporting President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo. Civilians have been fleeing the areas affected by the violence. Our Africa correspondent Andrew Hardy reports.
Gunfire in Mogadishu is not exactly unusual, but this is an exceptionally fragile and dangerous moment for Somalia. The immediate stumbling block is a delayed election. Somalia's president, Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo, has accused his rivals of brinkmanship and bad faith, and so instead of stepping down at the end of his term, he recently extended it by 2 more years. But the international community is not backing him, and Somalia's state institutions, the army in particular, are now at risk of fragmenting, perhaps along clan lines.
Moscow's prosecutor has ordered that the political officers at the jailed Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny suspend their activities across the country. It has also applied to a court to suspend the work of Mr. Navalny's separate anti-corruption foundation. The court in Moscow is due to rule this week on whether to ban the organizations as extremist groups. One of the foundation's lawyers, Ivan Pavlov, warned many people could face criminal charges.
We believe that the organizations we represent did not break any Russian laws. We also understand that the trial targets not only those organizations named in the lawsuit, but also people who support those organizations, who watch the Anti-Corruption Foundation's investigative videos, and who provide them with money as well as moral support.
Russia is expelling an Italian diplomat in response to Rome's decision to expel 2 Russian military attachés it accused of spying last month. Moscow called Italy's actions unfriendly and summoned Italy's ambassador. Rome has denounced the retaliation as unjust. It expelled the attachés after police said they caught an Italian Navy captain passing secrets to a Russian official in return for money. World news from the BBC. Doctors in India have given harrowing accounts of the situation as the country battles a catastrophic wave of coronavirus infections. Medics in the capital say people are dying on pavements outside hospitals as they wait for beds. There have been more reports of patients in hospital dying as oxygen supplies run out. International help is starting to arrive, with a man of oxygen concentrators landing at Delhi airport. An Iranian court has sentenced the British-Iranian charity worker Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe to a year in jail and a year-long travel ban on charges of propaganda against the state. The British government called the sentence inhumane and unjustified. A lawyer is planning to appeal. Caroline Hawley has more details.
The news came this morning when Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's lawyer was summoned to the office of the judge who had tried her last month. That latest court case took place shortly after her 5-year sentence on charges of working against the Iranian regime had ended and her ankle tag had been removed. She remains at her parents' home in Tehran, and her husband says she's not yet been summoned back to prison. But he described the verdict as a very bad sign. It was clearly a negotiating tactic by the Iranian authorities, he said, who are in the middle of discussions with the West on reviving Iran's nuclear deal.
Officials in Afghanistan's eastern Kunar province say
Cloud disconnected.
This compound has injured at least 16 people. Many of them are children attending a competition to recite the Quran. Missile shells hit the assembly hall where the competition was being held in Asadabad. No group has yet claimed responsibility. The auction house at Sotheby's said it has sold a pair of sneakers worn by the rapper Kanye West for a record $1.8 million. The Nike Air Yeezy ones were brought by an internet platform investing in sneakers. And that's the latest BBC News.
Welcome to OS with Nuala McGovern. Thanks for joining us today on the BBC World Service. We're going to talk about a story you were hearing in the news bulletin. It is about concerns over violence between the government and opposition forces in the Somali capital, Mogadishu. This is after the country's president extended his term by 2 years. Now, violence in the country is sadly not unusual, but this situation has been described as particularly dangerous. We're going to connect with our reporter who is there in about 10 minutes' time to get more details and context from her. But before that, let me turn to another story also in the bulletin. The dire situation in India when it comes to COVID-19. Hospitals in Delhi and many other
Wi-Fi hotspot unavailable.
Oxygen, people are being forced to treat patients at home. India on Monday reported a new global high for daily coronavirus cases. This is for the 5th day straight. Also for deaths, the number of cases was 353,000. So we've been hearing from people in India. I want to turn to one gentleman we've just connected with. The line isn't fantastic, just to let you know, to get your ear ready and attuned. But Sultan Satani is in Pune in the western state of Maharashtra, recovering from COVID, I understand. Sultan, you're very welcome to the program. Tell me what you're going through.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Actually, we had a family gathering and in which about 10 of the family members got infected. 5 had to be hospitalized, and my elder brother, aged 62, has certain medical condition. Sadly, he passed away on 8th of this month.
I'm so sorry, Sultan. I'm so sorry. And also that all of your family had to go through that. So how do you understand the pandemic in India? What do you think is happening, or what needs to happen?
Yeah, actually, it may be, for experts, to analyze all this, but as far as common people are concerned, actually, what we hear is this new variant or double mutation, whatever it is, seems to be, spreading far more quickly. And although actually there may be lapses on people's part, not maintaining social distancing and things like that, it has got aggravated further. In our case also, it was a family gathering which could have easily been avoided,
Yeah, but I'm really sorry that you're going through that. With your family, you mentioned so many got ill and your brother has passed. Are the other members of your family okay?
Yeah, of the 5 members who got hospitalized, the remaining 4, they are back home. They are all recovering. We are almost 80-85% we have recovered through this disease.
And I suppose in a way it was fortunate that they were able to find a place in hospital from what we're seeing now. Was it difficult?
It was relatively easy actually. One of our family members, contact works in the healthcare, so it was easy for them to get 5 beds that they required in the family. The remaining 5 of us were recovering at home only.
I understand, but you feel that there needed to be, that you needed to have contacts, to put it quite frankly, to be able to get those beds?
Absolutely. Otherwise it would have been far more difficult, for common people to access the hospital beds. And when we see the news and all, the situation is much worse.
And I don't want to be insensitive in any way, Sultan, but you said to me that you felt that family gathering could have been avoided, and you've lost your brother, so I'm really sad about that. But do you think that maybe the messaging didn't come through to you, that how serious COVID was? It just explain, maybe what the family was thinking about meeting.
No, it was actually the messaging and all were very, very clear, absolutely clear, no question about that. People are aware of what is going on. Only thing is, it was a wedding occasion, so this is all, post-factor analysis, whether now, but given my brother passed away because he had certain medical conditions, so So we could have a little more extra careful.
I understand. Do you think perhaps the government should, lock down more, I don't know, ban, for example, gatherings like weddings or the cricket matches or the electioneering?
That's the unfortunate part of it. The worst thing is the electioneering going on and the religious congregations in millions in the populous state of Uttar Pradesh, and the huge numbers turning out in millions. You can imagine, it's absolutely, as long as it serves the political purposes, it's been allowed actually, even though everybody is fully aware of the consequences. Human lives don't matter, it seems.
Life doesn't matter, it seems. So Sultan, I want to thank you for coming on, and again, please accept our condolences on the loss of your brother, and I hope your other family members make a full recovery. That's Sultan Satani in Pune in the western state of Maharashtra, giving us his experience of living through the past weeks. I want to turn now to another guest, also living through this pandemic in India, and his name is Vinar Verma. He is in the state of Gujarat instead, with his family in Ahmedabad, and he lost a colleague today to COVID, who was a young man who had got hospital treatment, but they could not save him. Let's listen to Vinar's description of what's happening in his country.
This gentleman who passed away today was a junior colleague of mine. He used to report to me when I used to work with one of the leading telecom companies. He's been struggling since five days. First, we struggled to find a bed for him. A hospital bed comes at a premium here, demand fast, it's out the supply. This city, I would say Gujarat, doesn't have that kind of bad health infra, but it's now stretching at seams. In an ideal, normal situation, an government ambulance will come in 15 to 20 minutes. Today, there is no guarantee that if an ambulance will come to your home in 12 hours, 14 hours. Yesterday, I was renting a bed for someone known. It took me 9 years. I worked with a health tech company. I have connects across hospitals. Then also for 9 years, 9 hours begging, I was able to manage a bed for a 65 years old lady. One indicator which is really sad, and people are not talking much about it, death figures are being fudged. If you go to crematorium in any part of Gujarat, whether it's Surat, if you're Vadodara or Ahmedabad, 6 to 8 hours of waiting time for a body to be cremated, which is unprecedented, unseen, very, very grim and sad situation. And what hurts more is people who should have held our fingers, people who should have, it started a month back when the numbers started shooting up in Mumbai. We never woke up. Our election rallies continued, our matches continued, our people were hell bothered about the common citizen. Even if we had woken up 30 or 40 days back, the situation could have been better. I think it's only last week when major politicians cancelled their political rally. Election was on today. There was voting in UP, there was voting in Bengal. I think human life is the most important thing, and what we see in last 1 week in India, we don't really value. From the city where I'm speaking in today, I think already we have a cricket series by the name Indian Premier League going on, and its version today, there's a match happening in Ahmedabad. I think one of the former Indian players, he backed off today maybe because of personal reasons, but again that shows the kind of contrast in society we are in, kind of double standard we have in our society, and I pray that sanity prevails. It's common citizens who are helping each other. Their common social media is the biggest savior at the time, and I think we need a reform. We need a big reform. We need a big awakening. We need a mirror in front of us. Because I've been in the city for the last 20 years. It's faced an earthquake, it's faced floods, it's faced riots, but never ever I saw that this is a situation now. Be afraid to even go out. I have 2 daughters, both footballers. They haven't played for the last 3 months, and now the only way to save yourself is you save yourself. I don't know if tomorrow something happens to you, even though you may be very well connected, you may be hunting for a bed. And I would have any shame in sharing it out here. I can't take the names. There's a big corporate group in this town which is into the business of tea. 1,000 crore groups you can convert into. If I talk a billion there, the chairman of the group owns a chartered plane. I have been connected with him, and today a person who owns a chartered jet calls me for an oxygen cylinder. See the helpless we are in.
So it's Vinar saying that are even super wealthy, calling Vinar, trying to find some oxygen supplies, but also what we're hearing there is like if you don't have contacts or some way in. Can you imagine how difficult it must be? I've also been speaking to Davina Gupta. She's the BBC senior journalist in Delhi.
I've spoken to at least 4 people this morning today who told me that they are feeling COVID symptoms, but when they want to go out and get tested, path labs are turning them away. And that's the reason where it starts, that if you can't identify people who are COVID positive, how will you control the cycle? How will you take the next steps? And when I spoke to the owner of one of the private path labs in Delhi, he told me that they simply do not have enough workforce to deal with the kind of load that they're seeing of patients coming in, and that's why the results are also being delayed for patients who have tested with them, and they put a lot of people on wait list, and that wait list is running for 2 to 3 days for some people. So when you don't have enough testing done on the ground, you would actually not know the real situation.
So, I have another question, Davina, as we look at the numbers. And this was one that I saw online. This is an Irish author, Eilish O'Hanlon, who also writes for the Sunday Independent in Ireland. And she said, genuine question, the scenes in India are tragic, but she says, I don't understand the figures. India is so big, like with 1 billion people. How can 3,000 deaths a day from COVID overwhelm the health service?
I would ask them to visit to India whenever it's possible and just see the current state of public health infrastructure here. Because of course it's a country of 1 billion plus people, but the kind of public health care system that we have in India is not enough. We have one doctor for thousands of people, and that's the state of affairs when we don't have a disease in the country, when we're not looking at an infection of this scale. So you can just imagine why there are city hospitals that are running out of beds. So at least private hospitals have capacity of 500 to 600 COVID patients, but we're talking about a city of 90 million people which are battling this infection, and around 28,000 people who've been infected almost daily.
I understand. Well, let me turn as well to, you were with us on Friday, and thank you for that. You were talking to us about the oxygen supply, and I did think about people after the program, because you said they had 2 to 6 hours to try and save some of those patients if oxygen supplies arrived. What happened over the weekend?
We've just seen the situation turn for worse, because we still have hospitals that are sending urgent SOS messages that some have taken to social media, saying they just have 2 hours and 3 hours of oxygen left for their patients. Today, when I was in a hospital in Delhi's model town area, where it's been the hospital has just refused admissions to patients. They put a poster on the door saying we can't admit any more patients. We just have few hours of oxygen supply left, and that's disheartening. I'm speaking to people that they were grappling to find beds in different city hospitals. Some of them had oxygen cylinder in their car, and I asked them how did they get that. They said they purchased it from black market, and they paid 10 times the amount which they would get at a regular price, and that's only a 45-minute supply.
Thanks so much to my colleague Davina Gupta. Following her on Twitter, you should too, at Davina Gupta News, as she keeps us abreast of what's happening in the capital and also around the country. Okay, let me turn to some of our headlines. These ones on our news site right now. Let me bring you a few in brief. In Ivory Coast, all driving test examiners have been suspended while the government looks into alleged fraud and corruption, as well as a rise in road accidents. Police officers will take over and officiate driving tests for 3 months from next week. On our tech pages, Google's Argentina domain name was bought by a web designer while the site was out of action for 2 hours in the country last Wednesday. Nicholas Corona, 30 years old, said he managed to buy google.com.au through a legal process. Google Argentina told the BBC, I quote, for a short term, the domain was acquired by someone else, adding it had regained control of the domain very quickly. And to the US, a woman failed to return a Sabrina the Teenage Witch VHS tape. There's a blast from the past. Rented 22 years ago, this woman has been given a criminal record for felony embezzlement. Her name is Karen McBride. She found out about the charges earlier this month when she tried to change her name after getting married. She said the video must have been rented in her name as it was not her cup of tea. Okay, let me turn to my colleague Bella Shiko, who's joining us from Mogadishu, waiting patiently for us. Thank you so much, Bella. We're hearing about fighting on the streets of the capital, Mogadishu, between forces loyal to the opposition and soldiers that are supporting President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo. Why did the fighting break out?
So this fighting was the result of anger that has been building up in Somalia for the past few months after President Farmajo's mandate has expired on February 8th. And just 2 weeks ago, the parliament has extended his term by 2 years, and this has really created, an anger in Somalia. Opposition candidates and even some of the government officials has been really very angry by this because they say that it was unconstitutional, it was against the law. So the fight was not just between opposition leaders, it was also clan militia and also some of the government forces that have been rebelled from the government.
I understand. So really about a struggle over power. And so what is the scene on the streets? How has this affected regular people that are going about their business in Mogadishu?
The scene in the streets of Mogadishu today and tonight is different from the one last night, because last night there was a horror in the streets of Mogadishu. They were empty. The city was under a lockdown. There was security forces everywhere and every street, and you could even barely see people walking because everyone is afraid and they are in their houses. But tonight the situation is kind of different because the tension has now decreased. There is an ongoing negotiation between the two parties who are in conflict, and as we are speaking now, the tension is decreasing because we think that the negotiations are, coming up handy as tensions are decreasing. So yeah.
I understand. And just briefly, he's known as President Farmajo, the Italian for cheese. Why is that?
I think it's because his family name, and a lot of people in Somalia kind of have Italian names. For example, me, my name is Bella, and it's Italian.
Yeah. I didn't even pick up on that, Bella, but thank you so much for joining us from Mogadishu, and good that tensions are beginning to subside somewhat. But Bella Shigo is going to keep across that for us from Mogadishu. You're listening to OS from the BBC World Service, coming up just 24 minutes past the hour. I want to turn to Myanmar. Since the coup on the 1st of February, which saw the military seize control of the country, we have spent a lot of time speaking with protesters about the political situation in the country. Now, those protesters, they're continuing to turn out on the streets. They're still demanding the release of their leader Aung San Suu Kyi, and there is a piece on the BBC website today as well that has been very popular online, particularly on the site Reddit. It's about Myanmar's healthcare system and the situation that it finds itself in after this coup. The BBC's Nick Marsh wrote that article, and I got to speak to him a little earlier.
Doctors were one of the first groups of workers to take part in the civil disobedience movement. Now, that is essentially a large-scale nationwide strike in which public employees, but also some private ones, essentially said, look, we don't recognise your authority and we're going to down tools. We will not work any longer so long as you're in charge. If our leaders, for legal democracy, and Aung San Suu Kyi are released and the elected government isn't restored, we're not going to keep working. Now, in the banking sector, that means that people will have difficulty accessing their funds. If you work, for example, on the railways, that means that the transport infrastructure becomes decimated. But if you're a doctor, that really is a matter of life and death. And what we're seeing now is that virtually all public hospitals, which make up about 80% of all healthcare facilities in the country, are basically shut. Which means that if you're a patient, say you're a cancer patient or you have HIV and you require long-term treatment, life-saving treatment, you just can't access that anymore. Now, the doctors that I've been speaking to, firstly, they're incredibly scared to speak to people like me. They're also incredibly scared to make themselves known publicly. but they're really, really torn because they know that their patients are suffering. The way that they see it is that if they return to work, that means they're recognising the legitimacy of the army, and that means that the army then will continue to be in power for, well, years, decades, and things will return to a much darker time the way they see it.
We've spoken a lot about coronavirus and COVID-19. I mean, is that part of the discussion as well? We haven't really heard that much from Myanmar about how it's going about a global health crisis.
Yeah, I think the reason we haven't heard much about the COVID situation in Myanmar since the coup was launched is that really the now military-controlled Ministry of Health and Sports has stopped keeping tabs on the numbers. I mean, the testing system is essentially decimated. Just over 15,000 cases of COVID-19. That kind of put it in the mid-range of cases when it comes to Southeast Asian nations. They weren't doing great, but they weren't doing terribly either, especially when you look at the Philippines or Indonesia. If you look at the month after the coup, they recorded about 500. Now, clearly, COVID hasn't just disappeared in the month after the coup. They've just stopped testing. And all the medical experts on the ground that I've been speaking to have told me if you stop testing, that means you don't know where the virus is. And as soon as you get these massive protests, mass gatherings, disbursement of people, fleeing violence going all around the country, you've got all the ingredients for a real flare-up. So we could be seeing a really big wave, some big spikes in Myanmar in the months to come.
I also saw, Nick, that people are also concerned about the strides that Myanmar has made in the past when it came to healthcare with HIV, for example, or tuberculosis. Talk us through why that is.
Yeah, I mean, if you take a disease like HIV, for example, Myanmar was quite similar to countries in the region. It was an emerging crisis. The numbers of people being infected with HIV was increasing at an alarming rate, but international aid agencies started to work with the government. They started to work notably with the democratically elected government in the last 10 years, let's say, and they put money towards they called it the National AIDS Program. They started putting money towards this program, which would not only treat people who have HIV, they would also invest in education programs. So that number actually started to go down. The number of people dying from AIDS-related illnesses started to go down. But now, with effectively, and it's hard to overstate this point, but now, with an effectively non-existent public healthcare system, people who would rely on this safety net for their treatment have nowhere to turn, which means that HIV sufferers, therefore, could become more infectious, they could continue spreading the disease, and if nothing's done, if the money isn't there, then something like HIV, again, could spike. The same goes for tuberculosis as well.
In half an hour, you can hear Outlook.
Norwegian fisherman Joar Heston's life was turned upside down when he helped to free a beluga whale known as Valdemir from a harness.
Before I met Valdemir, I was probably the happiest man on this planet. I was fishing, looking after my children, and after meeting Valdemir, get this wake-up call, and it's just, there's something completely wrong.
At 19 GMT, it's the climate question.
It's now super easy to count calories thanks to labels on food packaging.
Could the same be done for carbon? And then in Discovery, we ask, how many hamsters on wheels would it take to power London?
Whatever you were to assume, our fluffy friend running in a wheel equipped with a generator could generate up to 0.5 watt of electric power, enough to power a small LED light bulb.
That's all still to come from the BBC World Service.
Hello and welcome to OS with Nuala McGovern on the BBC. We're going to bring you a conversation we had with 3 people speaking to us from Australia, the United States and South Korea, who all suffer from a debilitating invisible condition, severe health anxiety. And as you can imagine, they're suffering even more during this health crisis of the coronavirus pandemic. So you'll hear their stories, and also from a psychologist on what might be able to help them.
BBC News with Julie Candler. The European Commission has begun legal action against the pharmaceutical firm AstraZeneca, alleging that it breached contractual agreements for the supply of its coronavirus vaccine. AstraZeneca said it would defend itself in court. The Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi has presented a coronavirus recovery plan on the $300 billion to the Italian Parliament, saying the destiny of the country lay in the projects it encompasses. Most of the spending will come from EU grants and loans. Anti-government militia in Somalia are occupying key parts of the capital, Mogadishu. It follows Sunday's eruption of fighting with soldiers supporting President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo. Moscow's prosecutor has ordered that the political offices of Alexei Navalny suspend their activities across Russia. He's also applied to a court to suspend the work of his anti-corruption foundation. Germany said the moves were incompatible with the rule of law. An Iranian court has sentenced the British-Iranian charity worker Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe to a year in jail and a year-long travel ban on charges of propaganda against the state. The Iranian Foreign Ministry has attempted to downplay a leaked audio tape of the Foreign Minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, in which he suggested that the Revolutionary Guards exerted too much influence over foreign policy. Doctors in India have given harrowing accounts of the situation there as the country battles a catastrophic wave of coronavirus infections. Medics in the capital say people are dying on pavements outside hospitals. Officials in Afghanistan's eastern Kunar province say a rocket attack on the governor's compound has injured at least 16 people. Many of them are children attending a competition to recite the Quran. BBC News.
Nuala McGovern on OS from the BBC. Thanks for tuning in or turning on, depending on how you listen. And I'm wondering, did you watch the Oscar ceremony? Have you seen any or many of those nominated, or perhaps those that won? We want to focus on the film that really was the big winner, Nomadland. It tells the story of people across the States who are, as the protagonist says, houseless but not homeless. So we're going to hear from people who live a nomadic lifestyle. One is in the States, the other is in Albania. So if you want to live vicariously